For decades, unexplained objects in our skies have captivated and confounded observers worldwide. From pulsating lights to impossibly agile craft, these mysterious aerial phenomena continue to elude explanation, challenging our understanding of physics and reality itself. Despite advanced tracking systems and eyewitness accounts, researchers remain baffled by these enigmatic sightings. Are they secret military projects, natural phenomena we don't yet comprehend, or perhaps something far more extraordinary? Join us as we delve into the most perplexing cases that have left even seasoned experts scratching their heads.
Starting off our list today, we have a 2018 UFO sighting that took place in the skies above North Carolina. Shout out to anyone watching from Elon University. In August of 2018, a man named Javion Hill claims to have spotted a UFO while driving home on US 74 just southwest of Charlotte. He described seeing lights in the clouds above him, shaped like a square. Immediately, he pulled out his phone and began snapping photos, which I have to admit are pretty convincing. After hovering in the sky above Javion for a good amount of time, the illuminated formation just vanished into thin air, as they do. You know how it is. It was as though it had never existed in the first place, but of course it did because there's proof, and we've seen it. And Hill, who says he was never a believer in aliens before that night, claims that during the time in which the object was hovering above him, he was seriously concerned for his safety.
On June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, saw something in the sky near Mount Rainier in Washington, something that he couldn't quite explain. He described 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation. What really caught his attention was how fast these things were moving, at around 1,700 miles per hour, which was faster than any known aircraft at the time. And when Arnold reported what he saw, it ended up getting massive media coverage. The Kenneth Arnold sighting is often referenced as the first big UFO encounter in modern times. After Arnold's sighting, lots of other reports started coming in about strange things in the sky across the United States. The government and military were getting intrigued, and the US Air Force started Project Sign, which was the first official government investigation into UFOs. This later became Project Blue Book, which looked into thousands of UFO sightings to try and figure out what was going on. So is it just one of these cases where he saw something and then everybody else started like getting excited and, just thought they were seeing things? Or was this just the time where UFOs and aliens were starting to come down to investigate things here on Earth?
Next up, we have 2 commercial pilots on different aircrafts claiming to have seen a mysterious flying object in the sky while flying above Arizona on February 24th of 2018. The first pilot to spot the UFO called into radio traffic control to ask if another plane had passed by him. The controller answered no, and then went on to make a joke about the pilot having possibly seen a UFO. Ground control then contacted another pilot flying an American Airlines flight a little bit behind the first plane, and asked the pilot to inform the control center if an aircraft were to pass over the plane. And a short while later, the pilot did exactly that. He said that a fast object had flown 3,000 feet over his plane in the opposite direction of which he was going. Once again, ground control had no knowledge of the aircraft, and it didn't show up on any of the radars either. Both pilots later described the objects as illuminated and incredibly fast, saying that they were nothing like the weather balloons they had seen sometimes floating at that altitude before. Plus, there were no records of this object, so what could it have been? Well, a UFO, duh.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was the lead investigator of Project Blue Book in the 50s. His job was to investigate reports of UFOs and find any possible explanation for them. Of course, if there was none, it would be categorized as a genuine UFO. French had shot down a lot of UFO reports over the course of his career, but in 1952, he witnessed something himself, something he could only describe as a genuine alien encounter. He kept what he'd seen a secret for decades. It wasn't until 2013 that he testified before 6 former members of Congress in DC, describing an event that happened back in 1952. A number of residents off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland, had reported spotting 2 unidentified flying objects. so French was tasked with heading over to Canada to basically debunk it. The UFOs had crashed into the water, and when Lieutenant Colonel French arrived, he saw this crowd of about 100 people, including some police, standing by a wharf, gawking at something in the water. French made his way over, and when he looked down into the clear water below, he saw what looked like two large circular aircraft-like objects, and there were apparently two beings working on them. French described the creatures as, quote, 2 to 3 feet tall, light gray in color, very thin, long arms with either 2 or 3 fingers, the top of their heads much wider than their jawline. Their eyes were very slanted, and you couldn't see pupils in them. He then described the objects slowly rising out from the water before abruptly accelerating and taking off into the sky.
Next up, we have the very first record of a UFO encounter to take place in New England, USA, which I bet you didn't know was actually a major hotspot for extraterrestrial UFO and UAP activity. That's unidentified aerial phenomena, for those of you who don't know. The first recorded sighting happened in Boston, New England, and it was also the first ever documented sighting in the US as a whole. It took place in 1639, and credible reports have been popping up ever since. The record was a second-hand observation recorded by colony founder and governor at the time, John Winthrop, who wrote that a sober, discreet man had seen the sky above Boston become illuminated by a green light while he was rowing his boat along the river one evening. The light was still for a moment and appeared to be flaming, and then it morphed its shape and darted off into the night sky towards Charlestown. The encounter lasted for 3 hours, with the object in the sky going higher into the air and then rushing down closer to Earth again and again, back and forth. By the time it ended, which it did when the object just disappeared into the night, the man along with his boatmates had traveled 1 mile upstream with absolutely no memory of how they had gotten there.
This next one has to be the wildest alien encounter case in recent history. So in March of 2023, something strange went down in a small Bolivian village called Horania. It all started with reports of a mysterious green light hovering in the sky. People whipped out their phones to capture the event, having no idea what the hell they were looking at. But unlike a lot of your typical UFO cases, this one doesn't just end with people seeing something strange in the sky. Things get way weirder. So 2 days later, residents claimed to have seen tiny beings darting around the town at night. One villager, Rita Marquez, described them as little and almost like goblins. Some locals even claimed to have found one of these small creatures dead in a gutter one morning, only for its body to vanish soon after. So, a lot to unpack here. Strange lights, possible aircraft, little beings running around the streets at night, and even a mysterious disappearance of one of these dead creatures. I don't know what to make of this case. Whenever there's a whole bunch of witnesses like this, I find it very interesting though.
Next up, we have Barney and Betty Hill's extraterrestrial encounter, which took place on September 19th of 1961 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the couple claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The ordeal started when the pair saw a bright light in the sky around 10:30 p.m. while driving home after a night out. Betty asked Barney to stop the car so that they could get a better look. He did, and then pulled out a pair of binoculars. What they saw was a massive, oddly shaped spacecraft with multicolored lights. They tried to drive away, but the spaceship, which they believed to have been at least 40 feet long, followed them, getting closer and closer until it was hovering directly in front of the pair's car. Barney claims he was able to clearly make out 6 to 8 humanoid figures standing on the ship who instructed Barney and Betty not to move, but rather to just keep looking towards the ship. The next thing the pair remembered, they had driven 35 miles away from their destination with no recollection of doing so. They tried to write down as much as they could about the experience on their way home, but their memories quickly became fragmented. It wasn't until years later, under hypnosis, that the pair separately both recalled being taken onto the ship and then separated from one another and examined by the humanoid alien life forms. In the days after the incident, however, both Betty and Barney's watches stopped working, and Barney noticed tiny, circles on the back of his truck, and when he put his compass near them, it went haywire. So, I'm not saying they were telling the truth, but I think they might have been telling the truth.
This next story is very outlandish, but it's an entertaining story, and I haven't talked about it before, so here it goes. Back in 2021, Angelina Lynn Johnston held a news conference in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Johnston claims to be a former retired defense intelligence officer who had an encounter with various alien species at a secret base in the Mojave Desert. She claimed that in January of 2010, a few years before she ran as a Democrat candidate for South Dakota Senate, she had met up with a couple in South Carolina who ended up taking her to this secret base. She didn't provide details on exactly where the base was in the desert, but said that she would be taking an astronaut along with a few scientists to the base, which had been built into the side of a mountain. She described seeing various alien species, including one that looked a bit like a praying mantis type creature, and that the beings all spoke to her through telepathy.
Next up, we have the Exeter incident, which took place in Exeter, New Hampshire in 1965 and actually inspired a best-selling novel, Incident at Exeter: Unidentified Flying Objects Over America Now, by John G. Fuller. Not sponsored. One evening in Exeter, a police officer patrolling Highway Route 101 stopped to check on a woman parked on the side of the road. When he asked her what was wrong, she answered in breathless hysterics. She claimed that a large red flying object with flashing lights had been chasing her. Just a few hours later, the police heard a similar story from another man, a hitchhiker who claimed to have seen 5 bright lights in the sky while walking along Route 150. He told officers that they had been about 100 feet away from where he had stood, and he watched as they hovered over a home before moving over to the airspace above a large field, and then disappearing and reappearing several times. Curious, one of the policemen went with the hitchhiker back to the spot where he claimed to have seen the UFOs, and sure enough, there it was. And another officer arrived shortly after to see the exact same thing: 5 bright lights high up in the sky disappearing into and reappearing from the trees over and over again. And then, over the next few weeks, authorities in Exeter received almost 60 other reports of UFO sightings in the area. So, if you like aliens and UFOs and Exeter was not on your bucket list, you might want to rethink that decision.
Finally, we have a case where 3 UFOs hijacked a pilot's plane in midair. This is about as disturbing a close encounter as it gets, as this man just narrowly escaped death. The pilot's name is Carlos de los Santos. In 1975, he'd been flying back to Mexico City. It was just another routine flight until it wasn't. Carlos spotted something on his right wing. It was this silver disc-like object about 13 feet in length. It was just right on top of the wing. Then he saw an identical object on top of his left wing. And as if that wasn't enough, a third object appeared, and this one was heading straight for him. In a panic, Carlos tried to steer his plane away, but the controls weren't responding. Luckily, the object just missed him though. He frantically radioed air traffic control, explaining that he'd lost control and was surrounded by these strange disc objects. And then, to his complete and utter horror, the plane suddenly veered completely off course. It was now ascending higher and higher up into the sky. Carlos had absolutely no control over the plane now. But then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the strange objects flew away. And miraculously, thankfully, Carlos regained control of the aircraft.
Number 10. 2 white lights. Okay, so this didn't happen in the States, but Canada. And all I'm saying is that Biden could get some info out of Mr. Trudeau if he really wanted to. On January 29th, 2023, Canadian air traffic controllers and pilots couldn't identify 2 white lights moving in a circular pattern reported over Canada's Northwest Territories. Good evening, just wondering, do you got 2 planes that are just to the east of your field doing circuits or maneuvers? A crew member aboard the Canadian North Flight headed to Yellowknife asked their traffic controllers. Negative, I have no reported traffic in the area, the Yellowknife air traffic controller replied. Do you have a visual on something? The crew responded somewhat hesitantly, yeah, we're looking at 2 lights dancing around here to the east of your field. They're above us, about I don't know what. We're We're not seeing them on TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system, but we can see the lights moving around. Then there's a pause before the crew member radios back to say, "We're not crazy. No, we believe you," the air traffic controller replies, and the sighting remains unexplained. I need answers, people. Why are there just 2 random lights in the sky? Number 9. Over New Mexico. On February 21st, 2021, a pilot flying over New Mexico at an altitude of 37,000 feet reported seeing a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast over the top of them, according to the published audio. American Airlines confirmed that the radio transmission came from Flight 2292. The FAA a few days later stated a pilot reported seeing an object over New Mexico shortly after noon local time on Sunday, February 21st, 2021. FAA air traffic controllers did not see any object in the area on their radar scopes. Seems like air traffic control can never see these objects, but the pilots can, and I can't tell if that's better or worse. Number 8. Shot down object over Alaska. On February 10th, 2023, aka like a month ago, the US military shot down an unidentified airborne object over northeastern Alaska. US officials said they believed the object to be a balloon, but couldn't confirm it since it broke into pieces after hitting the ocean, the New York Times reported. How convenient. News outlets owned by the Chinese Communist Party said Biden's response has shown the world how immature and irresponsible the US has been in dealing with this case. Oof, even other people are criticizing him. Number 7. Shot down object over Lake Huron. On February 12, 2023, just 2 days later, a US F-16 jet shot down an unidentified object over Lake Huron. An octagonal object with strings hanging from it was detected over northern Montana, Wisconsin, and the upper peninsula of Michigan at 20,000 feet. This was believed to be the same object tracked over Montana and monitored by the government the night before. Melissa Dalton, Assistant Defense Secretary of Homeland Defense, and General Glenn Venherk, head of U.S. North Command, say officials could not definitively assess what the objects were, so they acted out of an abundance of caution to protect U.S. security and interest. These most recent objects did not pose a military threat, but their path and proximity to sensitive DoD sites and the altitude that they were flying could be a hazard to civilian aviation and thus raise concerns, Melissa said. Operations are underway with multiple agencies, including the Coast Guard, to gather the object's remains and determine where it came from, they added. And when or if they figure out what it is, I wonder if they'll actually tell us. Probably not though. Number 6. Rosemount UFOs. A man living in Rosemount said he encountered a similar UFO on 4 separate occasions. On August 4th, 2017, the man was near his Rosemount home when he saw what he described as a black object with bright orange lights coming from the craft and flying over the area. Nearly a month later, on September 6, 2017, he saw 3 crafts with the same description hovering above downtown Rosemont. 2 days later, a singular craft returned to Inver Grove Heights, and he spotted the craft one last time on March 12, 2018. The man took photos or videos for each of the events and submitted it to the Mutual UFO Network. Seems like these aliens could have been stalking him, which I think is even more creepy. Number 5. Navy pilots. Recently, 2 former Navy pilots were interviewed by 60 Minutes on CBS News about a UFO sighting over the Pacific Ocean in 2004. Commander Dave Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich spotted the unidentified object during a training exercise, but were unable to classify it. Dave described it as a little white tic-tac looking object, adding that it lacked conventional exhaust plumes and had no wings or visible markings. It also moved erratically, the pilot said. In an interview with NBC News, Dave described the 2004 encounter, calling the object the strangest, most obscure thing I've ever seen flying. As soon as we look down, we see the white water, and then we see this little white tic-tac. It's pointing north-south, and it's just going forward, back, left, right, he said, adding that it was bouncing around like a ping-pong ball. Dave said he approached the mysterious object to take a closer look, and it began mirroring his movements. Then, when the pilot decided to get within half a mile of the UFO, it suddenly vanished. I'm surprised the government even let them do this interview, but my question is, if he did get closer, what were they gonna do? Wave hi to the alien? aliens? Number 4. Multiple objects in the sky. Ryan Graves, a former Navy pilot who testified that he witnessed unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, with his own eyes, and he called on President Joe Biden to investigate the mysterious objects spotted in American airspace. Ryan, a former fighter pilot, explained that after 2014, when upgrades were made to our radar system, our squadron made a startling discovery. There were unknown objects in our airspace. And these were not mere balloons like the Chinese spy balloon that dominated the country's attention in February. These were no mere balloons. They could hold their position, appearing motionless, despite Category 4 hurricane force winds of 120 knots. They did not have any visible means to lift or control surfaces. In other words, nothing that resembled normal aircraft with wings, flaps, or engines. These are not isolated incidents, Ryan said. We have a real UFO problem, and it's not balloons. The point is that we don't have as clear as an understanding of what's above our heads as we thought we did. There are uncertainties up there that we have to deal with. If we don't do it, our adversaries are going to take advantage of that uncertainty, that weakness, to spy on us with various means, as we've seen. It's pretty clear. If there are things over our head that we're not sure what they are, we need to figure it out. If they're adversarial, it's a national security issue. We have mechanisms for that. If it's not a national security issue, and if it's not an adversarial platform, then it's a matter for scientific inquiry. Not gonna lie, this scares me a little. Number 3. Leaked video. A leaked Navy video captured in July 2019 showed a sphere-shaped unidentified object flying over water near San Diego. The footage, obtained by documentary filmmaker and shared with NBC News, appeared to show the mysterious object flying for a few minutes before disappearing into the water. The video was captured by a Navy aircraft and recorded in the USS Alma's Combat Information Center, according to filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. The clip appeared to show a spherical object flying above the water for a few minutes near San Diego before it just vanishes. It splashed, military personnel can be heard saying in the video. The Defense Department confirmed that the clip was recorded by Navy personnel and said that it will be reviewed by the Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, a panel established last year to gain insight into the nature and origins of such objects. Number 2. You saw something you shouldn't. In 2008, a large aircraft hovered above Stevensville, Texas. Many people in the community saw it, and according to the Mutual UFO Network, a pilot named Steve Allen reported that the unusual aircraft was flying at an estimated 3,000 miles per hour and was being chased by fighter jets. Then a man named Rick Sorrell said he saw the same thing while hunting. Later, Rick said a strange man knocked on his door and said, "Son, we have the same caliber weapons you have, but we have more of them. You need to shut your mouth about what you saw." Creepy. Was this the Men in Black, people from their government, or real aliens? Who knows, but if that happened to me, I think I'd move out of state. And coming in at number 1 is the Pentagon. The Pentagon's new Office for Investigating Potential UFO Sightings received hundreds of news reports in 2022, and while it can explain more than half of these events, a sizable chunk remains a mystery. Within the new batch of sightings, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office and the Office of Director of National Intelligence say they're focusing on some 171 cases, including some in which objects appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities and require further analysis. Since it was formed last summer, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office has received 366 reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP. That total reflects 247 new UAP reports and another 119 that occurred between March 2021 but hadn't been included in an earlier report. The new numbers indicate a steep rise in UAP sightings. The report released in June 2021 listed just 144 reports, covering a 17-year period. With the subsequent additions, 510 UAP reports were in their files at the end of August 2022. Officials say they believe the rise in UAP reports is due to the US government efforts to destigmatize the topic of UAP and instead recognize recognize the potential risk the phenomenon poses, both as an aviation hazard and potential adversarial activity, such as foreign surveillance efforts. I don't know though, it seems like they're really starting to believe in aliens to me. Such as number 10's Ryan Graves. For those of us who keep our heads deep under a rock as possible, such as myself, Ryan Graves has been breaking the internet recently with his very vocal claims of UFOs, going as far to say that he saw them every day in his time as a Navy pilot. Now the dude is no foil hat freak. He comes packing your usual high qualifications and certifications needed for this role. So Graves is a former Navy pilot and engineer, chairs of America Institute Aeronautics and Astronautics UAP Integration and Outreach Committee, and now the founder of the new nonprofit Americans for Safe Aerospace, which is like Mothers Against Drunk Driving for our atmosphere. Graves chose to testify in front of Congress last month about how he feels these UAP, which is the boring version of a UFO, are actually a threat to our security and safety. So in April of 2014, his FA-18 squadron was on a training mission, and he said after achieving 12,000 feet in what's an exclusive naval airspace, i.e. nobody can fly here zone, two jets crossed the threshold to find, and I quote, a dark gray cube inside of a clear sphere, motionless against the wind, fixed directly at the entry point. He goes on to say that the jets, only 100 feet apart, zipped past the object on either side. The pilots had come so dangerously close to something they couldn't identify that they terminated the training mission immediately and returned to base. Ryan Graves said that the flight leader, in extreme duress, told him, I almost hit one of those damn things, man, in the pilot's ready room, and that we all knew exactly what he meant by those damn things, as they'd been plaguing us for the last 8 months. Having had this harrowing and potentially deathly experience, should things have been slightly different, Graves felt the need to develop a reporting service for pilots who come across these unidentified flying objects, shedding light on a huge amount of investment that goes into the training of commercial pilots. Graves questioned the government for turning its back on the UAP reports, even though they all come from credible eyewitnesses. Number 9, which is the 2022 H0219. So, unlike America, Canada actually does have a UFO entry database for pilots. It's called KDORS, and it'll document anything from unruly passengers on flights to birds getting sucked into engines to aliens, apparently. As long as it's causing a problem and it's in the air, KDORS wants to know about it. Now, Transport Canada, despite having a reporting service for such things as UFOs, still cautions that reports contain preliminary, unconfirmed data that can be subject to change. And 2022 H0219 is the KDORS case number assigned to an incident that took place on September 17th of 2022, when an Air Canada flight from Toronto, quote, reported passing an unidentified object approximately 10 feet above the captain's window while making a left-hand bank at 1,300 feet just an hour before sunset. The report continues to mention that the flight crew couldn't identify the object, which is confusing seeing as it's 10 feet from the captain's window, and they went on to land without further incident. Now the report wraps itself up with that, and trust me, if you visit the KDORS log, it's vague at best. But now you have a bit more context as to why they have that subject to change warning on their website. I'm not saying they would casually omit details, but you really think something was 10 feet away from the pilot and the airline's attendants' faces and they couldn't ID it? On to number 8, which is 2022 02794. Another KDORS flight sighting. So there is quite literally no shortage of them. According to CTV, from unidentified objects to strange lights, Canadian aviation officials receive at least 16 unusual reports in 2022, including 11 from pilots flying for Air Canada, WestJet, Virgin Atlantic, United, and more. This report was made by NAV Canada on November 12th of 2022. It was a cargo freighter flying from Chicago to Frankfurt, Germany overnight. The route taken brings the pilots right overhead northeastern Ontario, where good things grow. The KDORS document, which was entered a few days after the incident, states that the pilots reported seeing lights that were moving eastward at the same speed as the aircraft while flying in the dark. Now, there's no further information on this one, but I sure wish there was. Number 7 is a break from KDORS reports. It's going to be the racetrack. So veteran pilot Chris Van Forest told the Daily Mail of a strange encounter he had had in which 3 to 5 bright objects flew in a circular motion like a racetrack for hours on end over top of the Pacific Ocean in August of 2022. Their racetrack seemed to stretch from Honolulu to Los Angeles and then back. Similar to Graves, the 63-year-old Voris ain't some random dude in a tinfoil hat. He's racked up over 32,000 hours of flight experience working with multiple airlines, and when he witnessed this awe-inspiring yet decidedly creepy phenomena, Voris said that he was hit with an onslaught of other airline pilots radioing in to ask if he was seeing the objects as well. Apparently, as he told Daily Mail, about half of his pilot friends have seen some type of anomaly in the sky. They had to be in a very, very high orbit, or actually even in space quite a ways away from anything that a satellite would be, because every time we were seeing it, it was in the lower right hand corner of the Big Dipper, no matter where we were in the world, he told the outlet. It lasted for such a long time that it actually became boring. Almost. Van Voris's employer, whose name is withheld, forbade him from speaking about the incident. However, that hasn't kept him from running his mouth, claiming to have also seen 3 flying discs in a triangular formation back in 2004. Number 6 will be the letter response. After tackling the dragon that is paywalls, I was able to scrape together the details of a letter written by Art Sabowski, entitled A Pilot Explains UFOs for the Last Time. Now, to save you guys some time and the paywalls, Art's letter is essentially him complaining that he spent 45 years as a pilot and hasn't seen boo, and all his pilot friends haven't seen anything either, therefore no pilot could have ever seen anything ever, and if they have, they're either Mary Jane smoking or visually impaired. Essentially, you could title his letter, I am mad other professional aviators have seen something and I haven't. Now, the whole argument of if I haven't seen a thing, therefore it does not exist is pretty much the argument of UFO non-believers. This is why Ralph Lowinger was quick to fire back a response. So UFOs don't exist because you and your friends haven't seen one? I know they exist because I was a co-pilot of a Pan-American cargo flight with 5 crew members who clearly saw their formation. It was on a crystal clear moonless night over Nova Scotia's south coast, and we all watched and saw the same thing through different panes of cockpit glass. Their dance was from another world. It lasted 5 minutes and terminated with the most dazzling feat of aerodynamics we have ever seen. I have now retired to the largest fly-in community in the world, in which many highly trained observers know that UFOs are real. Cataracts and floaters aside. Lowinger and other crew members never reported their sightings, but their story did come to light in 2011. Number 5 will be the skydivers. So this story comes out of the Virginia pilot Julius Figueroa in July of 2022. Julius had served in the Navy as a pilot for 2 years before getting a job in the Midwest as a skydive pilot. What would be considered an everyday venture, loaded up with his usual adrenaline junkies trying to touch the clouds, Julius and his passengers experienced a different kind of adrenaline-invoking experience. We were climbing 10,000 feet, and at around 4,300 feet, I was looking into the distance and this thing caught my eye, Figueroa said. It started getting closer and it was approaching me about 15 feet to my left heading north. Figueroa goes on to say that the object was spherical golden orb that was flying very fast, but interestingly, he reported that you couldn't see the object when you looked at it directly. Other pilots have reported the same thing during their encounters, and it does sound like an explanation for what happened even in our first story, where Gray's team didn't notice the flying anomaly until they were about to crash into it. Julius said that the object was the size of a small car, and without realizing it, he started turning his plane to the left. As the object passed by, Figueroa said he started yelling, causing the other people in the back of the plane to look out the window. 3 of the skydivers see it, including one of the instructors, Figueroa says. By the time I turned the plane, it was already on the horizon, and shortly after, the object was gone. Figueroa contacted air traffic control and asked them if they'd seen a drone on radar, to which they said they didn't. He called again and described the object he saw and asked if they had seen it. To quote him, there was a long pause on the other end, and then they said they didn't see it. Number 4 will be the Passover, and not the one with the matzah and the karpas. I'm still full from the last one. I'm talking about the weird and very underdocumented occurrence from June of 2023 in which a pilot in Toronto reported, and I quote, seeing a person in a wingsuit flying at an altitude of 13,000 feet. Now, articles did mention that this incident was filed with Transport Canada. However, even after spending hours searching KDORs, I was unable to find a report or provide a case number. But to give you an idea why this reporting is so weird, aside from everything about it, A, who uses a wingsuit nowadays? And B, this altitude actually breaches the death zone. For those of us who don't climb Mount Everest in our free time, the death zone is to refer to the point at which an altitude's lack of oxygen becomes insufficient to sustain human life. The average person tends to die around altitudes of 8,000 feet and higher, and it's all attributed to the physical capabilities of cellular oxygenation. information. So what does that mean? Aliens. Number 3 is gonna be our last CADORD report of the list. It is 2022-1004. Where? Kitchener-Waterloo area. For my viewers outside of Canada, it's a few hours drive from Toronto, Ontario, and it's a lovely little college town chock full of frat boys, geese, and hockey. And now, apparently, their new claim to fame is that there's some aliens all up overhead. During the daylight hours of May 28, 2022, local police were notified after multiple reports were received by local traffic of an unidentified object, possibly a balloon or a radio-controlled plane, at 3,000 feet and 7 nm south of Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario. It's incredibly frustrating trying to pursue more knowledge or information on this sighting, as unfortunately its documentation is limited to what I just told you. You'd think there have been so many witnesses and reports between pilot and citizens alike, perhaps there'd be more statements. What I did learn, however, is since Ontario kept popping up for these sightings and I was curious, is that according to 2022 numbers, Quebec led all provinces with about 29% of all Canadian UFO reports, narrowly edging out Ontario, who has 28% out of the total recorded 786 sightings in our country. Number 2 is the Tic Tac. Remember Ryan Graves and how he testified to Congress? Well, he's not the only one who did. During a hearing before the House lawmakers, retired Navy fighter pilot and commander David Fravor testified about his experience seeing what he described as a Tic Tac looking object while on a flight back in 2004. Commanding the FA-18F squadron on the USS Nimitz, he and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich were on a flight off the coast of Southern California on November 14th of 2004 when they saw a flying object. The advanced radar on the ship was part of their training group and detected what operators called multiple anomalous aerial vehicles over the horizon, descending 80,000 feet in less than a second. Fravor and Dietrich swerved over that way to investigate, each carrying an extra witness, the weapons system officer, in the backs of their jets. Fravor recalls the experience. I said, dude, do you see that thing down there? And we saw this little white Tic Tac looking object, and it was just kind of moving above the whitewater area. Fravor went in for a closer look. He described the Tic Tac object mirroring his movement, saying it was aware we were there and that all 4 of us in the airplanes literally were watching this thing for roughly about 5 minutes. The object was about the size of Fravor's FA-18F, with no markings, no wings, and no visible exhaust plumes. When Fravor tried to cut off the strange flying anomaly, it accelerated so quickly it seemed to disappear. He said it was detected roughly 60 miles away less than a minute later. I think what we experienced was, like I said, well beyond the material science and capabilities that we had at that time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years. And coming in at number 1 will be the 7. So this ex-FBI agent named Ben Hansen is now the host of the Discovery Plus TV series UFO Witness. He works hard to try and bring attention to UFOs, and in doing so collects worldwide reports and videos he can share that are as credible as possible. He compiled accounts from pilots from Southwest Airlines, Hawaiian Airlines, and others between August 6th and September 23rd of 2022. And in the captivating account we'll be discussing from this time period, a former military pilot reported seeing multiple aircrafts flying above him. Pilot Mark Hulsley was flying a charter jet on August 18th of 2022 off the coast of Los Angeles when he suddenly radioed in the following. We've got a few aircrafts to our north here, and he's going around in circles, much higher altitude than us. Any idea what they are? The confused controller responds, telling the pilot he's not sure. Hulsey then calls back 23 minutes later to say that the 3 aircrafts he had originally reported had now increased to 7, flying between 5,000 and 10,000 feet above him in a regimented pattern. While the controller continues to dismiss him, we hear the anxiety spike in Hulsey, who's absolutely adamant, stating in the recorded footage to the controller that they just keep going in circles. I was an F-18 pilot in the Marine Corps, and I'm telling you, I've done many intercepts, I've never seen anything like this. According to Hansen, the strange lights that some pilots reported as possible aircraft were seen by upwards of 15 different commercial flights, and that at least 6 pilots are willing to go on record with their names and everything if asked to do so by any investigative agencies. According to Hansen, it means in this case we have a global phenomena as far west as Japan to as far east as possibly Miami. Whatever it is, these pilots are seeing it from halfway across the world. Hansen said there's no official protocol for reporting strange sightings for civilian pilots because they don't think the FAA will follow up, or worse, they will be ridiculed. But as we know, Ryan Graves is working to change that. Number 10. backyard aliens. In late April of this year, Las Vegas police officers investigated reports of two unknown entities falling from the sky, and on the same night a nearby resident called 911 to report something 100% not human on their property. According to authorities, a man called 911 to report two unknown entities in his backyard after he and his family saw a similar object fall from the sky. The man described the creatures as 8 to 10 feet tall beings that appear to be like aliens with big mouths, big shiny eyes, and added that they're 100% not human. They were looking right at him and his family from their backyard, and he kept clarifying that it was not a joke and that he was terrified of whatever was lurking in the dark. While initially open for several days, the department has since closed the case. The family said officials returned to the home over several days to investigate. Representatives from nearby Creech and Nellis Air Force bases said they were not involved in the incident and suggested contacting the Metro Police. A spokesperson for the Pentagon did not immediately respond to questions regarding this event. So who knows what they truly saw? Number 9. Strange lights. Since the 1940s and possibly even earlier, there have been a strange light phenomenon observed in the Hessdalen Valley, Norway. The spectacle has a form of white or yellow light of unknown origin standing or floating above ground level. Between 1981 and 1984, the lights were observed up to 20 times per week, but have drastically reduced in frequency since then, about 10 to 20 times per year. Now why the decrease all of a sudden? No one knows, and no one knows where the lights come from, but UFO enthusiasts took this as a sign that the valley was a portal to other worlds. Now it wasn't just conspiracy theorists that were interested in this, as the strange bursts of light in the 1980s attracted physicists too, interest piqued by the idea of some unexplained natural phenomenon. In the decades since, scientists have determined the glow likely comes from air turned into plasma, and despite ongoing research and numerous working hypotheses, there is no convincing explanation of the origin of these lights, and it seems like it will always be a mystery. Number 8. Cities in the sky. On April 21st, 2017, the citizens from China were awestruck to see an image of a sky floating in the clouds. This phenomena had happened years before in 5 different locations in China, but there was still no clear clarification on how or why this happens. On April 21st, 2017, the citizens from China were awestruck to see the image of a city floating in the clouds. This phenomenon had also happened years before in 5 different locations in China, but there was still no clear clarification on how or why this happens. Some scientists came up with different theories, such as aliens attempting to cross from a different dimension, the second coming of Christ, or is it the image of the holographic test by the Chinese government? Another possible explanation is the infrequent weather event called Fata Morgana, where the light that passes through heat waves causes a duplication effect. However, that seemed unlikely because the image on the sky didn't match the skyline below it. Number 7. The Tunguska Incident. The Tunguska Incident was an approximately 12 megaton explosion that occurred near the Tuska River in Russia on the morning of June 30th, 1908. A massive fireball dashed to the ground before exploding about 6 kilometers above the Earth's surface, and this explosion slaughtered a lot of animals and completely crushed the surrounding forest. It even sent a hot shockwave for miles. Now, some scientists believe that the fireball was an asteroid. However, the biggest mystery in this event was that the massive explosion left no crater and no meteor material that can be found to be examined. Others say that the object which blasted into the sky was composed of ice, and that's why it left no debris, and the Tunguska event is the largest impact event on Earth in recorded history, though much larger impacts occurred in prehistoric times. An explosion of this magnitude would be capable of destroying a large metropolitan area. It has been mentioned numerous times in popular culture and has also inspired real-world discussion of asteroid impact avoidance. Number 6. The Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix Lights were a series of widely sighted unidentified flying objects observed in the sky over the southwestern states of Arizona and Nevada on March 13, 1997. Lights of varying descriptions were seen by thousands of people between 7:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. in a space of about 300 miles from the Nevada line, Phoenix, to the edge of Tucson. Some witnesses described seeing what appeared to be a huge carpenter square-shaped UFO containing 5 spherical lights. There were two distinct events involved in the incident: a triangular formation of lights seen to pass over the state, and a series of stationary lights seen in the Phoenix area. Now, this wasn't the only time the lights were seen there, as many reports of strange lights over the state in 2007 and 2008 also happened. This event has since become one of the most notorious UF sightings in history. Number 5. Skyquakes. I didn't even know that skyquakes were a thing, so for those of you who don't know, skyquakes are mysterious booms from the sky, but are not thunder, and they are heard all over the world. The mysterious booms sound like cannon fire rumbling down from the sky. Now, they are commonly heard near water, occasionally rattling windows and plates. Now, some have been explained by military aircraft breaking the sound barrier, but that doesn't account for reports of skyquakes heard as far back as 1824. Now, scientists have come up with a few likely causes. Near coasts, the booms may be caused by enormous waves crashing against cliffs. Sand dunes are also capable, through unexplained mechanisms, of producing sounds, including on rare occasions, large booms. Other options are meteors generating sonic booms as they speed into the atmosphere, shock waves caused by coronal mass ejections from the sun smashing into the Earth's magnetic field, distant volcano eruptions, far-off thunder redirected through the upper atmosphere, deep earthquakes making noises by cracking the crust, and gas belching up from underground vents beneath the ocean or lake beds. But the fact that it could be so many things without a definite answer is freaky. Number 4. The Belgian UFO wave. The Belgian UFO wave began in November 1989. Reports were filed many weeks after the event. Now, many of the reports related a large object flying at low altitude. Some reports also stated that the craft was a flat, triangular shape with lights underneath. The Belgian UFO wave peaked with the events of the night of March 30th to 31st, 1990. On that night, one unknown object was tracked on radar, and two Belgian Air Force F-16s were sent to investigate, with neither pilot reporting seeing the object. No reports were received from the public on that date, but over the next 2 weeks, reports from 143 people who claimed to have witnessed the object were received, all of them after the event. Over the ensuing months, many others claimed to have witnessed these events as well. Following the incident, the Belgian Air Force released a report detailing the events of that night. Members of the waiver gendarmerie who had been sent to confirm the original report described 4 lights now being arranged in a square formation, all making short, jerky movements before gradually losing their luminosity and disappearing in 4 separate directions at around 1:30 a.m. Number 3. Forest Grove Sound. In 2016, a high-pitched noise was heard intermittently at night in Forest Grove, Oregon. The Department of Forestry determined that their equipment was not the cause of the sound, and the Washington Post described the noise as sounding like a giant flute playing off-pitch, car brakes, or a steam whistle. NBC News described it as akin to a bad one-note violin solo broadcast over a microphone with non-stop feedback. It reportedly lasted from 10 seconds to several minutes at a time. The noise occurred near Gales Creek Road. Neither the City of Forest Grove Public Works Department nor the fire department were able to explain the noise. According to NW Natural, there were no problems with gas lines in the Forest Grove at the time. In February 2016, Andrew Dawes, a professor of physics at Pacific University, mapped the locations where the noise had been heard, although the results were inconclusive and did not suggest a single location. Throughout February 2016, approximately 200 calls were made to the Forest Grove Police Department, according to Captain Mike Herb, who said that most of the calls were suggesting explanations for the sound, ranging from frogs to aliens to Bigfoot. In late February 2016, the Forest Grove Police Department announced via Facebook that the noise did not pose a safety hazard, and that the police announced that they were halting their investigation until further information appeared. However, after February 2016, the noise was not heard again. Number 2. UFO photograph. A photo taken in St. Paris, Champaign County in 1932 is considered one of the earliest possible photographs of a UFO ever recorded. It shows George Sutton, a local resident, and what appears to be a classic UFO-shaped object over his left shoulder. Skeptics say the object is simply a street lamp, but according to the folklore that surrounds this image, there were no electric streetlights along this road in 1932, nor are any wires or poles visible in the image. The photo is also intriguing because it predates the flying saucer craze of the late 1940s and 50s. It was taken before the alleged Roswell UFO crash in 1947, and 6 years prior to the broadcast of the War of the Worlds in 1938, when some people believe that aliens were attacking Earth. In other words, the person who took this photograph either captured a street lamp, a real UFO, UFO or was way ahead of the curve in terms of pulling a good hoax. But I'd like to think it's a real UFO. And coming in at number 1 is Marfa lights. Yellow orbs like lamp-lit basketballs hover and twinkle and at times gyrate over the shrubby high desert ground in the shadows of the Chinani Mountains. They appear in the darkness south of US 90 between Alpine and Marfa. Journalist Michael Hall wrote about seeing the Marfa lights in a June 2006 story in Texas Month. Yellowish white lights that glowed, faded, disappeared, and returned in different places. Sometimes they changed colors, other times they split apart. I couldn't tell if they were 10 miles away or 100, the size of a car or a house. Now just about everyone in Marfa and many who have visited have a story like that. Now no one really knows the answer to these lights, but some believe it is the ghost of Apache Chief Alasti who allegedly haunts the area. Other claims it's space aliens trying to contact us or the ghosts of Spanish conquistadors.
And we're kicking off this list with the Navy UFO sighting. So back in 2020, the Pentagon released video footage taken by United States naval aviators of strange objects hurling through the sky. They moved in ways no known aircraft does, and pilots described them seeming to defy the laws of physics. In these series of videos, they're completely confused and shocked about what they're seeing. The videos were recorded back in 2004, so the Pentagon were holding on to these for a long time, and the fact that they were finally released really says something about how much of this could be going on. They can't keep it under wraps any longer. It's getting to the point now where even the government is like, yeah, people kind of need to be informed about at least some of it. I mean, who knows what they're still hiding though. If you're liking the channel so far, by the way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We got awesome content coming at you on the daily. At number 9 is the Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting. This is one of the most important UFO sightings in history. It happened on June 24th, 1947, and is a pivotal event in the history of UFOs. Now, NASA has not been established at this point, but the event made a huge impact on government policy regarding unidentified flying objects. Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, reported seeing 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation near Mount Rainier in Washington. He estimated their speed at around 1,700 miles per hour, much faster than any known aircraft at the time, and Arnold's sighting received widespread media coverage, leading to increased public interest in UFOs. And this event is often considered the first modern-day UFO encounter. In the following weeks, there were numerous reports of UFO sightings across the United States, leading to the coining of the term flying saucer. This case also had a huge impact on government and military agencies. The US Air Force initiated Project Sign, the first official government investigation into UFOs. This eventually led to the formation of Project Blue Book, a long-running study of UFO sightings. So, this sighting not only heavily contributed to the curiosity surrounding UFOs and aliens that continues to this day in pop culture, but also contributed to the scientific inquiry and government policy when it comes to UAPs. Next up, we have Frank Shaw's gargoyle. So this one isn't your standard UAP in that it's a winged cryptid sighting, but it was seen by multiple NASA employees at the time, primarily Frank Shaw, who worked in Houston's John Space Center. On the night of the incident, Shaw was on his way back to his car at the end of his shift when he spotted something strange. It was what looked to be a massive winged humanoid creature perched on one of the Space Center buildings, almost like a gargoyle or bat creature, and suddenly it started unfurling its wings, which Shaw described making this crackling sound before it swooped into the air. Shaw was just stunned, unable to move, having no reference for what he had just witnessed. Suddenly he snapped out of it though, and he rushed to his car. Now, if this were just a one-time thing, I'd be like, alright, maybe he was just really tired, maybe he just saw something totally innocuous and just freaked himself out, yada yada. But it wasn't just a one-time thing. There were other employees at the station who had also encountered a winged creature. Apparently there had even been a file opened on the thing just a few months before Shaw saw it, after 2 German shepherds at the station had been found completely torn apart, and they were found in the same area that Shaw saw the creature. At number 7, we have high altitude objects. So the story here is that several mysterious high altitude objects were down in February of 2023 over various airspaces. You probably remember this in the news. We had objects being spotted over Canada and the United States, Latin America, China, Eastern Europe. Started when several unidentified objects were down over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. The general of NORAD, Glenn D. Van Herk, made a statement saying the objects could be benign but wasn't 100% sure. When asked if they could be of alien origin though, he said he wasn't ruling anything out. It literally seems like government and military agencies are just starting to become more open to the idea of extraterrestrial life, or maybe some of them already are fully aware of their presence. Either way though, it seems like they're being discussed openly more than ever before. It's not being written off as nonsense like it has been in the past. And here's another interesting part of these cases. There were recovery attempts made. Unfortunately, the objects landed in areas that aren't all that accessible though, so it made it pretty difficult, and the recovery missions were abandoned. Now, that's what they say, but what if the government did recover something that they just aren't ready or willing to show us? Who knows? At our number 6 spot, we have Oumuamua. This one's definitely been talked about plenty of times, including on this channel, but it's a recent article dated March 7th of this year that I'm mostly referring to. In a recent article written by Sean Kirkpatrick, head of the Pentagon's AARO, or All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which specializes in unidentified flying objects, and Harvard professor A.V. Loeb, they discussed the possibility that objects like Oumuamua spotted back in 2017 could be of alien origin. The article said that objects like the Oumuamua could be quote-unquote a parent craft that releases many small probes during its close passage to Earth. They didn't just discuss the Oumuamua though, they were looking at a variety of unidentified probes. And they went on to speculate that these crafts could potentially power their batteries from starlight, and that Earth's water could be fuel. There's some pretty wild stuff in there, and yes, a lot of it is speculative, but the fact that a highly respected scientist that spent 20 years studying physics is proposing these kinds of ideas, it's pretty fascinating. Coming at number 5, we have the Alaska sighting. The event began when Japan Airlines Flight 1628, a cargo plane, reported encountering an unidentified flying object during its flight. The pilot, Captain Kenju Taruchi, and his crew described seeing a massive disc-shaped object with glowing lights flying in close proximity to their aircraft while flying over Alaska. They also reported that the object displayed erratic movements, seemingly defying the laws of physics. Ground radar stations at Anchorage International Airport even tracked an unidentified craft that matched the flight's description. The radar data not only confirmed the presence of an unknown object, but also its proximity to the airplane. And after the incident, all of the data, including the radar records, was reportedly collected and presented at a meeting with officials from the FBI and the CIA. According to witnesses, these government agencies acknowledged the radar recording as evidence of a genuine UFO, but they later disavowed any knowledge of such a meeting. Number 4, the Richard French sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was an investigator for Project Blue Book in the 1950s. Long after retirement at a citizen hearing on disclosure in 2013, French made a shocking statement. His job had been to solve cases involving supposed UFOs, usually by debunking them, but as it turns out, he had actually seen one himself, although he hadn't included it in his report at the time. The 83-year-old described an incident that took place during an investigation off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland back in the day. 2 mysterious aircrafts had reportedly crashed into the water. He had followed a group of about 100 onlookers on a nearby wharf and described seeing 2 to 3 foot tall beings, thin and gray, looking to be repairing their vessels. He then watched in awe as the crafts rose out of the water before flying off at incredible speeds. Next up, we have the Phoenix Lights. On March 13th, 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona, USA, thousands of residents reported seeing a series of strange lights in the sky. The lights were described as bright and hovering slowly in a V-shaped formation. This event unfolded in 2 parts. First, there were reports of lights moving slowly across the state from the northern to the southern region. Then, later in the evening, a stationary V-shaped formation appeared over Phoenix and lingered for several minutes before vanishing. The official explanation initially attributed to the lights was military flares being dropped during a training exercise, but this explanation didn't match the descriptions given by witnesses who reported a massive silent object blocking out the stars. Some speculated it was a UFO, while others believed it to be a secret military aircraft. At our number 2 spot, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. The Rendlesham Forest incident, also known as Britain's Roswell, is one of the most well-documented UFO events in history. It occurred in late December of 1980 near Royal Air Force Woodridge, or RAF Woodridge, a US Air Force base located in Suffolk, England. Over a couple nights, multiple military personnel reported encountering strange lights and objects in the forest adjacent to the base. On the night of December 26, 1980, U.S. Air Force personnel, including Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, investigated reports of unusual lights in Rendlesham Forest. They witnessed strange colored lights in the sky and on the ground. Halt recorded his observations on an audio tape describing the lights as red, green, and blue, and confirmed the presence of an unidentified craft. 2 nights earlier, on December 24, 1980, security personnel at RAF Woodridge reported seeing a triangular-shaped object with red and blue lights hovering above the forest. It appeared to land and leave impressions on the ground, and when radiation readings were allegedly taken at the site, it indicated unusually high levels. And finally, we have the 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, also known as the Washington Flap. During 2 consecutive weeks in July of 1952, a series of UFO sightings occurred in the airspace over Washington, D.C. On the night of July 19, 1952, radar operators at Washington National Airport detected a cluster of these unknown objects flying at very high speeds. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing bright lights moving erratically in the sky. Similar sightings recurred on the night of July 20th, prompting the U.S. Air Force to scramble fighter jets in pursuit of these objects. Pilots reported seeing the objects visually, describing them as glowing lights that defied the laws of physics with their sudden accelerations and maneuvers. The CIA took a keen interest in this case, conducting its own investigation. Declassified documents have since revealed that the CIA closely monitored the events and requested daily briefings on the sightings. To this day, these sightings have not been fully explained. And we're starting things off with some news that actually just came out the other day. Possible hidden structures on the far side of the moon. How exciting is that, right? China's Chang'e 6 rover spotted these buried structures, and news about the study came out in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Planets, which stated the GPR sends electromagnetic pulses into the lunar interior and receives echoes from the subsurface layers. We use the high-frequency channel data to detect the structure of the upper 40 meters along the rover's path, primarily consisting of rock debris and soil. Through this investigation, we have discovered multiple layers in the upper 300 meters, which likely indicate a series of basalt eruptions that occurred billions of years ago. So basically, the moon may have looked very different billions of years ago, because it would have had volcanoes. That is pretty awesome, but this also goes to show that there could be other stuff below the surface of the moon, perhaps something more ominous than the remnants of billion-year-old volcanoes. And it looks like I'm not the only one wondering if there could be something lurking beneath the surface. On to the next point. A new paper by Harvard University's Human Flourishing program discussed the possibility of an alien base hidden inside the moon, and in this base, there could be a number of aircraft used to quickly transport the beings down to Earth in order to continue their research or whatever the hell else they could be doing. I mean, we've talked about this kind of thing plenty of times, but it's pretty interesting to see academics from Harvard discussing it. The purpose of this paper was to give a possible explanation for all the UAP sightings that seem to be cropping up more and more in recent years, and the idea that extraterrestrials could be closer to Earth than we may think, with a base hidden right on our very own moon. It definitely makes the increase in UFO or UAP sightings more understandable. Next, I want to discuss something else that was brought up in this paper, the term crypto-terrestrial. This part dives into exactly what type of being may be operating the UAPs and possibly living hidden among us on Earth or even on the moon. The paper discusses 4 theories. The first are what we call human crypto-terrestrials. This theory suggests that a technologically advanced ancient human civilization once existed but was most likely wiped out by a disaster like a massive flood, but that some remnants of the civilization continued to survive in secret, living in stealth among us today. Then there's the hominid or theropod crypto-terrestrial theory, that a non-human terrestrial species evolved to become technologically advanced and chose to live in hiding, possibly underground. These could be ape-like hominid descendants, we're talking like Bigfoot, Sasquatch type creatures, or even, according to this paper, intelligent descendants of dinosaurs. That's pretty wild. The third is former extraterrestrial or extratemporal crypto-terrestrials. These would be your classic idea of aliens, beings that might have come to Earth from out in space. And lastly, this one gets really crazy, magical crypto-terrestrials, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Basically mystical or magical beings that exist on Earth but remained hidden from human view. Now, we often talk about the potential dangers of intelligent life out in space, but what about wildlife, particularly underwater? Now, I know what you're thinking, there is no water on the moon. Well, it turns out there might be, and before these potential waters are explored remotely with rovers, manned missions may be getting put on hold in order to avoid any potential dangers. The darkest spots on the moon are its poles, and a number of scientists do speculate that there could be water or ice in these areas that could be useful to manned missions in the future. Nick Estes is the Science Operations Manager for ShadowCam, which is a NASA instrument being used to map out the darker areas of the moon. Now, he thinks there may very well be water up there, and where there's water, there's often life. At least that's what we see here on Earth, so who knows what kind of creatures could be swimming around on the moon. There's not as much protection against space debris on the moon as there is on Earth. In fact, there really is none, and this is also quite a problem. Micrometeorites are tiny particles of rock and metal that zip through space, and even though they're small, they can cause damage when they collide with something because of how fast they move, sometimes at speeds of tens of thousands of miles per hour. Now, on Earth, we're protected from these micrometeorites by our atmosphere. When they enter the atmosphere, they burn up and create what we see as shooting stars. But the moon doesn't have an atmosphere to provide this kind of protection. So micrometeorites hit the lunar surface directly. For astronauts and their equipment, this is a big deal. Imagine one of these things flying into a spacesuit. The impact could be strong enough to puncture it, and that wouldn't be good. They could also, of course, damage equipment, so having a lunar base set up isn't as easy as it might seem. Maybe that's why the aliens built theirs below the surface. In part 1, I discussed the possibility of astronauts contaminating places we visit, like the moon, or places we might visit, like Mars. But what about the opposite? Us possibly bringing something back to Earth from the moon. We've never done any prolonged missions up there, so who knows what kind of deadly pathogens could be lurking on the moon that are just invisible to the naked eye. When we think about deadly pathogens, we're usually talking about viruses, bacteria, or other microorganisms that can cause disease. On Earth, we've seen how dangerous these can be, but what about on the moon? Even though the moon isn't known to support life, there's still some concern about pathogens. First of all, who knows if germs brought from Earth could interact with the moon in some unexpected way and possibly even mutate. Then we bring that stuff back to Earth and have some problems. There could also be microorganisms already on the moon, and if they were to be brought back, we could have a deadly situation on our hands as well. Fortunately, NASA does have strict quarantine procedures for astronauts returning from space though, but you never know. Speaking of the moon getting you sick, let's talk about lunar hay fever. This was something astronauts described feeling on the Apollo missions. Lunar hay fever is a term used by astronauts to describe their reaction to lunar dust. When Apollo astronauts visited the moon, they found that the fine, powdery dust on the lunar surface could be a real problem. When astronauts return to their lunar module after a moonwalk, they often bring this dust in with them. The dust sticks to their suits, and because it's so fine and sharp, it gets into everything. Once inside the lunar module, the dust can become airborne and be inhaled. Now, we talked about this in part 1 already, but I didn't really get into the first-hand accounts of what this stuff can do and the effect it would have on their bodies. Astronauts reported symptoms similar to hay fever, sneezing, nasal congestion, sore throats, and even itchy eyes. This reaction was due to the dust being extremely coarse and abrasive. All these tiny little sharp particles caused physical irritation. Astronauts would often describe the inside of the spacecraft smelling like burnt gunpowder because of all the lunar dust. But lunar dust may be more than just an annoyance. Like, who knows what health risks there are when inhaling these particles over long periods of time. The dust is not only sharp, but it's very small, so it can get deep into the lungs and potentially linger there for a long time. Kim Priss, a pulmonary physiologist from the University of California, stated that, quote, particles 50 times smaller than a human hair can hang around for months inside your lungs. The longer the particle stays, the greater the chance for toxic effects. So that's a lot of fun. Astronauts also have to worry about moonquakes. These are exactly what they sound like. They're basically the moon's version of earthquakes. The moon doesn't have tectonic plates like Earth, but it still has quakes. They're just caused by different things. You have a few different categories of moonquakes. There are deep moonquakes. These occur about 500 to 750 miles below the surface and are actually caused by tidal forces from Earth's gravity, which is kind of cool. You have shallow moonquakes. These happen closer to the surface and can be much stronger. These are the most similar to the types of quakes we have here on Earth. These ones are the most concerning. Some have reached up to 5.7 on the Richter scale, and to put that into perspective, that's strong enough to cause damage to buildings if it were to happen on Earth. And obviously, meteorite impacts will also cause tremors. So I probably don't really need to explain why moonquakes could be a problem for future crewed missions to the moon, especially more prolonged ones. It seems like the moon also just doesn't really like our company very much. It's slowly distancing itself from us day by day. It gets about 3.8 centimeters further away every year. Now, this may not be a reason as to why NASA hasn't been back to the place in decades, but it is sort of an unsettling fact about the moon. Now, 3.8 centimeters per year may not sound like very much, but over time it can have some significant effects. The moon's gravity is the main force behind Earth's tides. As the moon moves further away, its gravitational pull on Earth weakens. This means our tides will become less dramatic. High tides won't be as high, low tides won't be as low, which can and will have an effect on ecosystems on coastlines. The moon also helps stabilize Earth's axial tilt. This tilt is responsible for our seasons. Without the moon's help, Earth's tilt could vary more wildly, which would lead to extreme changes in climate and seasons and make our weather patterns even less predictable than they are now. And finally, we gotta talk about the big elephant in the room, that maybe NASA hasn't done another crewed mission to the moon in decades because we never even went in the first place. Yes, the whole moon landing was a hoax conspiracy. Now, personally, I don't think the moon landing was a hoax. I have more faith in humanity and our abilities, and I just find this conspiracy just kind of pessimistic. But it is a conspiracy that's talked about a lot, even in the comments of part 1, so I'm bringing it up now. The idea here is that, of course, it's pretty simple. The space race was in full swing. The Soviets and the USA were desperate to prove their technological superiority, but both being unable to make a moon landing happen, one country decided to head to a soundstage and fake the whole thing. Some even say Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landing footage himself. Well, with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.
It's about creepy discoveries that scientists have made that made them super unsettled. Click the video now to find out more and look into these creepy cases yourself. See you guys in that next video.